Loading snacks.
Are y'all ready for your next panel? I will be your host for this panel. I am Sin from Loading Snacks. I have my team with me. I have Jokes, raise your hand. He'll be helping field crowds, audience questions. We have Gage over there, raise your hand. He will also be assisting with fielding questions from you guys. So let's get started. The next person coming to the stage, I'm pretty sure everybody here knows him or at least knows his work. He's done stuff all the way up and down with Muppets, all the way across the galaxy and beyond. So let's welcome to the stage, everybody, Mr. David Barclay. Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you.
How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing very well today, thank you. Yes, enjoying my time here. Lovely people.
Con's treated you well so far?
What's that?
The con has treated you well so far?
Everyone's treated me really well, yeah.
Awesome. Good to hear. So I want to get started with our first question that I have. When I think about the movie business and TV and all that kind of stuff, people usually say they want to be actors, directors, songwriters, all that kind of stuff, but I've never heard somebody say they want to be a puppeteer. So I know a little bit, but what made you get started in wanting to be a puppeteer and fall in love with it the way you have all these years?
Well, I have a very good excuse.
Okay.
My parents are puppeteers. So I grew up from the age of 4 with them doing puppeteering and building puppets, creating their own traveling puppet theatre, writing their own stories, and then performing every single day. They were professional puppeteers.
Wow, that's incredible.
And so as a kid, it seemed perfectly normal to do puppetry.
Did you ever think it could be like an actual, like, a job down the line in the future when you were doing it at such a young age? Did you think it's something you could do just going forward, like, forever?
Well, initially, because my parents were making a good living out of being puppeteers, and we mainly worked in London. I grew up in London, England, and so they would travel to do either theatre shows or would sometimes in the summer in the royal parks in London do shows, which was wonderful. It's a wonderful childhood experience. We'd do also traditional pantomimes, which was British pantomimes, because they were originally actors. They met at RADA, which is the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, and they wanted to be actors originally, but then decided puppetry was more for them, so they moved to puppetry. So I knew that it was possible to, and I knew their friends who were also puppeteers, but as I was getting ready to start my career, I mean, because I puppeteered from the age of 4 in their shows. So I did hundreds of performances, or thousands, as a teenager. But by the time I wanted to move into my own career, I was really more interested in TV and films and special effects.
Okay.
But at that point, there was no work for special effects or movies because it hadn't started yet. So the job that I wanted wasn't invented just then. And it happened to be the very first job that I got in film was on The Empire Strikes Back, working on Yoda. And that was the start of animatronics in movies. It was the start of the job that I wanted that didn't exist until I got on the very first job. So it was incredibly timed. My passion for what I wanted to do seemed to line up with the universe.
Right.
And the force was strong.
Apparently it was, yes, because for Yoda to be your first one and getting the job you actually want, that's pretty awesome.
It was, yeah. Because I saw the original Star Wars, as it was called, before they added A New Hope on the end of it, and I loved it. I really, really wanted to be in the film industry. My friend and I who saw it, I said, I've got to be in the film industry, and I wish I could work on something like that. Well, 2 years later, by a whole series of crazy, lucky coincidences and impossible situations, I found myself working on Yoda with the amazing Stuart Freeborn, who was the creator of Yoda, and then with Frank Oz, the chief puppeteer of Yoda.
I was going to ask about that. When it comes to creating your puppets and all that stuff, how much of it is just you putting into it for your creations, or how much are you working with other people to bring these creatures and everything together?
Well, something like Yoda or Jabba, or in fact any of the animatronic characters, is to build them is a massive team. It starts off usually with conceptual design. There was like Ralph McQuarrie and various different versions of Yoda drawn up. None of those look like the real Yoda, but they were the inspiration for Stuart Freeborn. And same with Jabba. Phil Tippett came up with a small model, tiny model, and we had to build a Jabba the actual size of Jabba. So start off with that. Then you've got all the great artists, sculptors and mold makers and technicians and mechanics who build the whole thing out, and with like Yoda, his costume as well. So there's this huge team of people building the puppet, and then to bring the puppet to life usually takes a large team of puppeteers. Yoda, it was 4. Jabba was usually about 6, but went to 8 sometimes.
Wow.
And I think the biggest single character, Audrey 2 and Little Shop of Horrors, in Audrey's biggest form, it took 65 puppeteers.
Wow.
Which is why it took so long to film.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive. 65 people? How many different versions of Yoda did you go through until you landed on the final one?
They started, I think, Wendy Midner-Froud sculpted 2 early versions of Yoda based on a soft puppet version that she made. Because initially they weren't sure how big Yoda should be. They didn't know what size his body and his head. And it's all based on the typical Muppet thing where your hand's the head and your arm's the body. So that is you can't make the body too long, which is why Yoda's quite small. He's the length of a puppeteer's arm. So they did a test of that, and Wendy sculpted 2 versions of the head that they liked, but they felt it wasn't quite realistic enough. So Stuart Freeborn did the final sculpture in clay. And that's the Yoda we know and love today that he did.
Yes, it is.
So, yeah. Except for one tiny detail, he sculpted it with the mouth open. And they said, oh, he looks great. So they did the plaster molds. They took the foam latex out of it for his skin. But they couldn't close the mouth because it was pre-opened in the sculpture. I couldn't stretch it down. So my first job working on Yoda for Stuart Freeborn in the makeup department was to sculpt a new top lip for Yoda that was about ½ an inch long that would close the mouth from the sculpture. So Stuart asked me to do 6 different versions, and he then ended up putting his skin texture on it, having it molded. He had them cast up in foam latex, and he tried each one on, and I like this one. And that's the one that became Yoda's top lip. So although Stuart did sculpt Yoda, I had this tiny little bit of contribution in sculpting Yoda's top lip.
How long did it take to get Yoda perfect from beginning to end?
He was about a 6-month build. It took about 6 months to get there, and the last few weeks he was still like way behind. And because no one had ever done this before, the attempt was to make him very, very light, because you're holding this creature above your head all day long. This is 12 hours a day, and so if it's really, really heavy, you're not going to last. And so the idea was to make him very, very light. But the mechanisms, no one had really built mechanisms like this before, and Stuart had done some amazing work on 2001: A Space Odyssey for Kubrick. He built the apes in the opening sequence that had all the lips that could move, controlled by the performer inside the mask. Amazing work, groundbreaking for its day, and just amazing. So Stuart was a genius, but he made these mechanisms very light, and they broke. So they had to get fixed. So yeah, and so while he was fixing it, the producer said, please, we need another Yoda because we've got nothing to film. We're waiting to film Yoda, and Stuart's in his office trying to fix him. So we worked around the clock, I think it was about 72 hours, putting together from all the spares a backup Yoda. And that backup Yoda is actually what's mainly filmed on Empire.
Okay.
Because as soon as we started filming with the backup Yoda, we didn't go back to Stuart's Yoda.
Just kept the backup Yoda for the rest of the time.
Yeah, it was working, so...
Speaking of Yoda, How do you feel looking at how he's become so important in pop culture and within the Star Wars franchise itself? Like, how does it make you feel seeing that work, that hard work that you all put in, see it still lives so strong today?
It's amazing. I mean, we got an idea that Yoda might be a bit of a breakout on Empire, but you never know when you're making a film. You really don't know how people are going to take to it. And we thought it looked pretty good when we were filming, but we didn't know whether the audience would like Yoda as well. I mean, when we filmed, Frank Oz did a guide voice that sounded like Grover. It wasn't. The original plan was not to use Frank's voice for Yoda.
Okay.
The original plan was to find a voice actor. So the Yoda sequence was edited together, and they tried 17, I believe, different voices, and none of them worked. So then George went back to Frank and said, it's not really working. Can you try to come up with a Yoda voice that's going to work for Yoda? So Frank did, and that's the Yoda we all know and love. But again, film typically has characters like the animatronics voiced by somebody different than the person who's performing them. So, but the fact that Yoda is still an icon is amazing because it's the first animatronic puppet in history, and he seems to be the most famous.
I would agree with that. Would you all agree with that? Yoda might be the most famous animatronic in history? Yeah, they agree. Now, I wonder, you've been walking around, going to these conventions, doing them for a long time now. Do you have like a moment that you've had with like a fan or somebody that like really meant a lot to you? Like with all the work you've done with Yoda and all the different animatronics you've done through all these years, or something that sticks out in your head?
Yes, actually, a couple of years ago, there was a special labyrinth convention, the very first time they did Labyrinth. And so this was set in some of the locations that they actually filmed the movie in. Most of it was on a film stage, on a sound stage. And so this was in London, just outside London. And I was invited along to be there because I was Didymus and the Worm and the Fire Is. So I went along there and having a great time. And then this woman comes up to me and says, "Oh, hi, David. I've been looking forward to seeing you again." And I'm looking at her and I didn't recognize her. She said, "When I was 6, I came by the Jim Henson Creature Shop on Dark Crystal, had a photograph with you. You were so lovely, and you encouraged me to be creative, and I have been. And the Creature Shop sent some photographs, and I've been wanting you to sign this ever since." And so she actually came and found me, this little girl, and she said that I'd changed her life by...
Remember how old she was?
She would have been 40-something, 46, 47. So she said, "This is the first opportunity I've had to come and say thank you."
That's awesome.
And it's like, wow, I couldn't believe it. Because I remembered her.
I bet there's a lot of people out there who can't wait to have a moment with you like that, going forward. Now, you've done so many animatronics over the years. Do you have a personal top 3 of yours? Where is it something personal to you or something that was just challenging to work on? Like, what are your top 3 animatronics that you've worked on?
Well, top 3, yeah. Interesting. Sometimes it's the performance, but I'm also somebody who builds puppets because my mum and dad sculpted and built the puppets and clothed them. They made the puppet theatres, they made the sets, they made the props, they did all the bookkeeping, they drove there and came back again. So they did everything. So I grew up with that sort of mindset that, if you want to do something, and I wanted to improve the puppets to improve my performance, which would then give me ideas on how to improve the puppets to improve my performance. So that was the way I was approaching things. And so on Didymus, on Labyrinth, it was literally state-of-the-art technology to create a full-standing computer robot marionette string puppet version of him, full servos inside the head controlling his face, and so he could move around, he could jump on the real dog's back. So technology, that was like really pushing the envelope. Then for like the cats and dogs films, I created proper data gloves, which I designed and patented to control puppets that went through a computer system that could mix and match all the different servos. And for Mr. Tinkles, he had 40 servos controlling 76 cables in his face. And people thought he was CG, the amount of movement and control that he had. So that was really, really technically advanced. probably one of the most advanced animatronics I think that's been built, and a real-size cat, tiny. And then one of the simpler ones was just recently I did Coyote versus Acme, which is a film that's going to come out next year.
Awesome.
It's Wile E. Coyote, and he's suing the Acme Corporation over the failed products he's bought over the years. Now, it's a ruse to get Roadrunner, of course, but I was brought in to be Coyote because producers said, well, how can the actors react to Coyote? Because he doesn't speak. You can't have an actor off set feeding the lines because it's going to be a live action film with Coyote being animated, much like Roger Rabbit. Mm-hmm. So they said, well, I have the producer, my friend of mine, Christopher, said, I have the solution. It's called David Barclay. So I built a 5'4" tall Wile E. Coyote puppet that had internal mechanisms which were actually very complicated. So his cheeks could frown or smile, his eyebrows could frown or go sad, all held and controlled by my right hand, because there's only one puppeteer to do Coyote, and that was me. So I had to do all the facial action, all the body, the arms and the legs and everything. So I built this puppet, and I was Wile E. Coyote every day on set. And it was such a joy. It was such a joy. And everybody loved it. Everyone said, yeah, it's great. And at one point, because the idea was that the visual effects department would remove me and the puppet and replace the Warner Brothers style animation in later. But they definitely wanted Wile E. there on set every day, every shot. And there was one particular shot where Wile E's in front of a big crowd. So we do the first take, and I just automatically left shot because I thought there's no way they can replace the crowd behind me. It's just that's crazy money to do that, because I know quite a bit about visual effects. So I go out, and then they do a take, and then the visual effects supervisor says, David, you've got to get back in there. And I said, but George, it's going to cost a fortune. He said, oh, no, that's my problem. But with you in the shot's really good. If you're not in the shot, it doesn't work. And that's the visual effects supervisor. So that's how tuned in they were to bringing Wile E. Coyote to life. So I'm hoping it's going to be very successful. And it was just great. It was just me being Coyote.
Yeah. With a lot of studios moving to like strictly CG and stuff like that, can you see your trade, puppetry, come back in movies and TV a lot more nowadays? Do you think it can make a return like in 2026, like people start looking for it more?
I don't know. I mean, I think probably the heyday of animatronics and puppetry was the 80s, 90s, well, 70s, 80s, 90s. And you do get some animatronics here and there, but most of us are retiring. Most of us who have the knowledge are retiring. And so there are some people who are still doing it, and there's some good work still being done. But typically, films are made in a very different fashion. Back when we did the original Star Wars films and like Little Shop of Horrors, everything was planned, storyboarded, and we filmed that version of the movie, and that's what everyone got to see. These days, they film lots of various versions, fix it in post, change people's faces even, change voices. They play around with it afterwards. You can't really do that with animatronics, because if you want to change it, you have to go back and refilm it, and that's expensive. So the way they make films today is not conducive to animatronics. So it has to be a specific style and choice for bringing the animatronic look to the screen, because, yeah, it's easy to send out visual effects across the globe remotely to do the animation. So
there's one movie I specifically wanted to ask you about, and that's The Dark Crystal. I love The Dark Crystal, but that was probably one of the darkest things with animatronics that I've seen. What was it like working on that movie?
It was amazing. Again, I had just finished working on Yoda with Frank Oz, Kathy Mullen and Wendy Midner on Empire Strikes Back. And so I had a couple of months free, but Wendy told me they were crewing up for the Dark Crystal. So I was the first British puppet designer, puppeteer to go to the creature shop, which later became known, and have my interview. And I was the first employee. I was the first British puppet maker. They had been doing some research and development in New York, in the New York Muppet workshop, but they just set up in Hampstead in London, and I was the very first British puppet maker on there because I just finished Yoda.
Right.
So I worked on initially the Mystics, spent about a year doing research and development, again because no one had built any of these characters before. There was no YouTube, there's no book on how you should build these.
Right.
The only way you can do it is to try, and if it failed, go back and fix it. I'll try again. And so I had a particular appreciation and understanding of Lyle Conway and the way he approached his work. He was a big fan of stop motion, the original King Kong, Mighty Joe Young, but he was a great sculptor, is a great sculptor. He's still with us. He's still a dear, dear friend in Los Angeles. And but he had a great approach to make things emote by changing expressions and working with the design and the sculpture and the mechanics. So again, we were working our way through it. We both seemed to be on the same page. And then I worked with Lyle for years. And so developing new techniques and trying, one of my things, again, like with Yoda, was trying to make everything as ultra light as possible,
right,
but resilient to last. Because, again, you've got a Skeksis head on your arm. You don't want it too heavy.
Absolutely not.
So one of the jobs which wasn't very pleasant was doing very, very lightweight fiberglass pieces for the beaks, the eyebrows, and the back of the heads for the Skeksis. Because we would ask the regular mold makers to do them, they'd come back weighing a ton. So Lyle said, no, that's not going to work. No, so it's like, you go and do it. So basically with a paintbrush and just spending hours and hours over tiny areas, making sure that they were nice and strong but very light. So he said, oh, that's great, yeah, do the rest now. So I kind of sort of gave myself, because it's horrible with fiberglass, all the smell and all the itchiness, but I kind of found myself a job because I did it because I knew the puppeteers needed it light.
Right.
So, but yeah, it was amazing. So I got to work with Lyle. I got to sculpt half of the Skeksis heads, because Lyle would sculpt one half and say, right, I don't want to do the other one, you do it, David. So then I would sculpt the other side of it. Brian Froud didn't want it a mirror image. He wanted it similar but asymmetrical. So I did that side. Then I got to sculpt the Urskeks, which is the guy at the end, the 11-foot tall combination of the Mystics and the Skeksis.
Right.
I sculpted the Mystic feet, and then worked with Lyle on building Aughra, Urskeks, and the Skeksis heads.
Wow.
So it was we did 27 puppets in 9 months.
27 in 9 months? That's a lot of work.
Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of long nights, no sleep.
Lots. Before we delivered the Skeksis, we worked around the clock for 2 days, so to deliver the puppets, because they had to be ready and they weren't.
Yes, because I loved it. I'm pretty sure a lot of people out there like it as well. All right, so before we get into some Q&A, you have a guest you want to bring up here with us?
We'll do that after the Q&A,
Okay, sure.
but just 5 minutes before we wrap it up.
Perfect. All right, so anybody have any questions they would like to ask David? One of the Lone Snacks guys will bring the mic over to you.
Hi, David. Thank you for being here. First of all, I just want to say I have a picture with you who I got several years ago at a convention of you, me, and the Yoda puppet, and it graces my wall all in my living room in a place of honor. So thank you so much for that. That's
my pleasure.
And my question to you is, you've done so many projects and worked on so many things. From a puppeteer standpoint, what was one of your most challenging projects that you've done?
Good one.
Most challenging, okay. Interestingly enough, every single one of them is challenging. I was speaking to other puppet makers on the building side, is that you're working the way through the character, and it happens nearly always because you're trying to innovate and push the envelope. You get to a point where nothing's working. The whole thing is a mess. and you think, oh my goodness, and you have to rethink it and redesign and just keep going until you have that breakthrough moment where it works, and it works really well. So every single character I've ever built has been challenging in that way. But I think probably the most challenging was on, wow, there's so many, but I'll just grab one. I'd say the cats and dogs, because what we had to do is we had to match the real animals. And I came up with the whole process of building the puppets so they could be adapted, because we were using fake fur, and fake fur wasn't the same length as the real animal fur. So if we'd sculpted the real animal as a real animal and put the fur on, it would look wrong. It would either look too thin or too fat. So we had to sculpt and create all the understructure before the fur, the muscles, that we could change the shape instantly to match the final fur, because you couldn't cut the fur because then the fur looked wrong. So you had to get the fur, because often when it's fur fabric, it has different lengths of fur, guard hairs and everything. So anyway, technically it was very, very tricky to match all the animals on cats and dogs, and we were also trying to push the boundaries of physical mechanics inside animals that were actual size. So all the animals on cats and dogs were actual size animals. So it was really tiny engineering. Then we've got to get all the fur perfect. So just as a challenge, it really was. And I was working initially on Cats and Dogs 1 with the Jim Henson Creature Shop, and they were fantastic. And then with Cats and Dogs 2, Lee Romer Studios, and equally, if not slightly better and more fantastic. Lee's work is just phenomenal. So yeah, we were pushing the envelope in getting matches, and yeah, a lot of people couldn't tell the difference. When we saw the first Cats and Dogs movie, I asked the crew, well, how many puppet shots do you think are in this film? You know, and they, oh yeah, we've got quite a lot in the film. Yeah. How many do you think? Well, we've got probably 75 shots in the film. And I said, well, actually, it's 315.
Wow.
So even the crew who worked on it and were there every day shooting couldn't tell that over half of the shots were completely invisible. They were absolutely, everyone thought they were animals.
That's awesome. That gives a testament to your work, how good it is.
So thank you for that question.
Yeah. Jokes, anybody on your end? Okay.
Hi. Do you have any more memories from the Labyrinth or working with David Bowie? And did you work on The Storyteller with John Hurt?
Yes, I did work on The Storyteller. I'll start with that and then go back to Bowie. Yes, I got to work on Storyteller. I'd just come off of being chief puppeteer for Who Framed Roger Rabbit. So that took a whole great chunk of time, and they would.
Classic.
I wasn't involved in the building on the Storyteller. But Jim asked me to come in, and he actually wanted me to build a string puppet that flaps out of the for the Soldier and Death sequence, which was the one that he was filming. He was directing. So, because Jim Henson only directed one of the Storytellers. Steve Barron, who went on to do the Turtles, he directed most of the others. And so Jim asked me to be part of that. And so, so I did actually build this marionette version over 2 days. I only had 2 days, that's all they gave me. So I had to put a marionette together. But Jim was so wonderful, because I came in and he said, oh, hi, David. And he said that he'd heard that I'd done amazing work on Roger Rabbit and congratulated me. And I couldn't believe it. I mean, here's the world's greatest puppeteer congratulating me. And it's like, and on a film that wasn't even his, you know. So that shows you the extent of how generous and wonderful Jim was. He really was. And he was very devastated that Labyrinth didn't make the money that it should have made.
That's a shame, because it should have.
It should have done. But again, like so much of Jim's work was ahead of his time. And you put Jennifer Connelly, a female hero in a fantasy film. No one had done that before. It was like, oh no, it has to be a boy, you know. It's like, no, Jim wasn't structured by other people's views. He wanted to make the films he did, which is why Dark Crystal was an all-puppet movie. Right. But from that, he wanted to combine the puppets with actors. And I think his daughter Cheryl suggested David. who was he was one of the nicest people you could ever meet. He was lovely. My good friend Toby Philpott, who was inside Jabba with me, and Toby and I were working on the Wild Things, Fire Gang. When we were filming them, they were called the Wild Things, but then we couldn't do because of Maurice Sundex, so they had to be changed to the Fire Gang. But while we were filming the Wild Things, Toby was a smoker at that point, and I never have been. So you can't smoke inside a film set, so he would dash outside to the nearest door and have a quick cigarette in a break, you know. And he said, "Oh yeah, well David Bowie's just come out for a cigarette," you know. He was wearing his tights, and there's nowhere to hide a packet of cigarettes.
Not at all.
So he had to borrow a cigarette from Toby, and so they sat there chatting. And Toby reminded me, he said, "Yeah, that used to be a period of time, didn't it? The time of having a cigarette. You'd go out and sit and have a cigarette together, and then go back on set." So, yeah, So that shows you just how down to earth David Bowie was.
Yeah.
He'd be happy just to hang out with the crew
And have a cigarette.
And he was just like one of the guys. Really lovely.
Awesome. Gage, in the middle.
Absolutely. Hi, I'm Andy. So I wanted to ask if there's any newer movies that maybe use CGI that you maybe would, if you had control, would replace it with puppeteer, like kind of getting rid of some of the uncanny valley-ness that we're
Right.
getting now. Any projects that you probably would have worked on?
That's interesting, yeah. I mean, it's... I'd like to see more and more puppets everywhere and more full puppets, because what happens is, and it's happened for 10, 15 years, where they'll do a base puppet and then they'll fix it with post-production. Probably because they haven't got a lot of budget to build the puppets, because puppets can be very expensive if you build them really, really well. So, yeah, I don't know. I think... it's tough because they're harder to fix if you're going to have a complete animatronic that has everything. If you want to change it, you have to refilm it, as I was saying earlier. So I think what series, I mean, I don't know. I know some of my British friends are working on some of the animatronics and the new Star Wars TV series and movies. And I'm glad there's work in there for puppeteers.
Yes.
And for puppet builders, so that's great. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know which ones I would want to. I'd like to change some of the older ones, some of the older CG that looks really terrible, and you go, oh my goodness, no, a puppet would be much better. But I think the CG has got a lot better these days, and I've got some really good animator friends who do phenomenal work, who are massively passionate about animatronics and are trying to fill that gap between CG and animatronics, try and make it closer so the animation looks like animatronics. And again, as I say, for Coyote, everybody, the lead animators were saying, yeah, we are going off of all your acting cues for Coyote, because they are accurate for the character, they're accurate for the scene, and it's just great to have them. So it's not like they've got a tennis ball and they don't know what to do.
Right.
I've laid down the performance as Coyote. Now, obviously, they can change it if the movie changes, because there won't actually be anything there. But again, it just felt nice that I had a creative input to the character.
Yes. Jokes, green dress in the front, please.
Hi. So I'm curious, when you're doing the acting through the puppeteering, what helps you really get into the character? And are you making like the faces behind the puppet?
I'm nearly always making my own faces behind the puppet. No, I think it's a really good question, because there were certainly a number of TV series in the UK in the 80s, 90s, where clearly the puppeteers were not considering any of the acting. They were reading the script rather flatly, and there was no interest in acting. One of my joys in my early career apart from working on Yoda and Jabba, was I got to puppeteer Sprocket, the dog, on Fraggle Rock. And much like Wile E. Coyote, he only barked, he didn't say words. So you couldn't put any emotion through the text. There was no text. So it all had to be in puppet mime or pantomime, how the head would move. I had an internal mechanism in the eyebrows that would make him frown or be surprised. And my assistant puppeteer could raise his ears by putting on a bar beneath his head. So using that, I was able to have Sprocket think and act without saying any words. And that was such a great training ground because I couldn't just use the dialogue.
Right.
So it made it very important that every tiny head movement, every pause, the way actors work, I had to translate that through the puppet into Sprocket to bring him alive, and that was wonderful. And having done that, I've used that same approach. You have to know the acting inside, and then you have to find the best way to get it into the puppet. And also for me, it's also, I need to know the character before I build it, so I know what the facial expressions need to be for that character. So each character would be different. 2 different puppets in Cats and Dogs, Mr. Tinkles and Calico, were designed and built differently because of their facial needs for their specific characters. So yeah, trying to nail the acting inside and then try and push it through the puppet is really trying to send this energy through the puppet of the acting, and that's I love that. It's just pure joy.
Do we have one more, I would say? One more, anybody? Sure.
Oh,
Hello.
Hi.
Sorry. So my question was, how was it different working on the Dark Crystal with everything being an animatronic versus working with actors on set that were reacting to you?
interesting. Yeah, well, for puppeteers, it's kind of similar. Because the way we work is that the puppets are always above our heads, nearly always, unless you're doing strings and you're way above. But for typical characters on Dark Crystal, and you're looking at the floor, you're not looking at the puppet, you're looking at the floor because there's a TV monitor showing you what the camera is seeing. So you are seeing yourself on camera, and you're not looking at the puppet, you're not looking at the other puppeteers, you live in that monitor. So everything that you do is staring, so wherever the puppet's looking, the puppet's got to look in a certain direction. You get that information from the monitor, not from the world around you. So two puppets speaking together as a puppeteer is the same as two actors speaking together. So the technical day-to-day working with that, the good thing is, though, with puppeteers, they appreciate the techniques and the multiple levels we have to go through to get a character to come alive. Sometimes actors don't do that. Some actors just expect it to be on and everything. I just saw Stephen Baldwin recently, who was on Flintstones, and we were working on Puppy Dino. And myself, Misha Sisti, and Kevin Carlson, the three of us were working on him. And we had a little tiny movement that we wanted. And we were rehearsing it and rehearsing it and rehearsing it. Wasn't quite right. Just keep going. And Stephen comes up and says, "Guys, you're taking it way too seriously." And I said to him, "But Stephen, if we don't believe in the character, nobody will, you know." So that's it. We all have to believe in the character. We all have to be on the same page, and that makes it a true joy.
Okay. We have very little time left, so before we get out of here, I know you want to go get your guest,
Yep.
who you all have been waiting for, I'm pretty sure. Yoda is joining us, everybody. Give him a round of applause.
Thank you.
Which version of Yoda is this one?
This is the sculpture from The Empire Strikes Back. And so,
Yes.
So this is the original Stuart Freeborn sculpture with my top lip. This is the exact size of Yoda. This isn't the original Yoda because, as I've said at times to other people, the original Yoda doesn't exist anymore because this material, this foam latex, has decayed. And so there is no original Empire Yoda anywhere. There's the original mechanisms and plastic inside the head, but not the actual Yoda puppet. So this I created as a 40-year anniversary sort of celebration of Stuart Freeborn's work, because
Awesome.
Stuart did such a beautiful job, and I wanted people to be able to see what he looks like in real.
And let's give Stuart a round of applause,
Yeah.
everybody, for his amazing work. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes.
I'm not gonna lie, this is freaking me out a little bit because it's so lifelike.
Yes.
His facial expression.
So are you. Yes.
This is so surreal right now, but this is incredible.
Yes.
So
there we
incredible.
Are. Yes. So if I'm actually soon going to be doing some photos. So if anyone fancies a photo with him,
I'm pretty sure a lot of people out here fancy
yeah,
a
I
photo
think there's
with
a few
Yoda.
people who have already booked some. So so there we are. Yes. So yes, there we go. Just a
Awesome,
little
ladies
bit
and
of Yoda.
gentlemen. David Barclay, everybody, give him a round of applause. And go meet him at his booth and get a picture with Yoda and him as well. What's going on, everybody? Did you enjoy what you saw? Of course you did. So if you want to help us out and support us, here's what you can do. On whatever platform you're currently streaming us on, just like, share, and subscribe. Then head over to patreon.com/loadingsnacks and become one of our patrons there.